It's the Ross Tucker Football Podcast.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a Wisdom Wednesday presented by DraftKings. Speaking of that, by the way, make sure you check out the Business of Sports podcast this week because Andrew Brandt is all over this Washington football team investigation, everything coming out of the NFL league meetings. As you know, this year we're kind of alternating Andrew here on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast every other Wednesday. I am so fired up for today's guest. I told you yesterday, his name is Ryan Paganetti, very bright guy. He was in charge of game management for the Philadelphia Eagles under Doug Peterson. If you follow me on social media or you watch me do games or whatever, you know this is a pet peeve of mine. The Eagles did it extremely well under Peterson, under Ryan Paganetti's watch. We'll dive into all of that in a couple of minutes. I should mention we're only 2 days away from more winners. Spread the word via social media at Ross Tucker NFL, at Ross Tucker Pod. Looking at those Facebook shares, I just posted a clip to facebook.com/Ross Tucker NFL, as well as the quote tweets of either at Ross Tucker NFL or at Ross Tucker Pod. Sponsors, we got a bunch of new ones that are awesome. Autozone and Crocs, among others. Make sure you send me those email confirmations after you take advantage of any of those if you want the Madden. And then the YouTube shout out, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. That'll be Friday. Love doing those cameo style videos. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
All right, so as promised, I've been looking to get a guy on like Ryan for a long time and came across his Twitter handle, over the course of the last year or so. Obviously was familiar with him during his time with the Eagles. So I guess, and by the way, follow him on Twitter. It's at Paganetti Ryan. Is that right, Ryan?
Yep.
Okay. So let's start with your background, Ryan, because I know, but I'm not you played football at Dartmouth, right?
Yeah. I wish I
All
would.
right, so give me your background. Where are you from? What years were you at Dartmouth? What position you play? Give me the background.
So I was from Massachusetts, and I went to Dartmouth in 2010 to 14. Unfortunately, I had to get the labrum surgery in the hip and shoulder, and it kind of jacked up my career. And I started getting into coaching. So at the end of my college career, I was coaching in high school too, and getting some experience with that. But I had an economics degree from Dartmouth, so I kind of had a little bit of a background there with statistical things and analytics. And I was always sort of following the NFL analytics community back then, even when it was a lot smaller and it was a lot more considered controversial. And then I was I was fortunate to get an internship with Chip Kelly in 2015, and then I was lucky enough to be retained by Doug Peterson's staff, and I sort of fell into this role as being like this game day manager guy for him. And I had a lot of fun with that. And then I sort of finished my role with the Eagles sort of as like a hybrid position as game management. And then I also was assistant linebackers coach. And, we had a lot of fun. There was a lot of ups and downs. Like there was a couple times, people were roasting me on Twitter because we went for a fourth down and it didn't work. But, I enjoyed it. And it was a great experience, particularly working with Doug, who was very receptive to analytics.
So, okay, there's a lot there, man. So you got into coaching right out of college. How did you get the Chip Kelly internship a year after you graduated?
So I actually, my older brother he went to University of Oregon. His first year at University of Oregon was actually Chip's first year as the offensive coordinator there. And we had a connection where my brother started helping out, University of Oregon as a student assistant. And then he stuck around for, Chip's like 6 years at Oregon, where they had tremendous success. And then Chip brought him over to the university. He brought him to Philadelphia as an analyst. And that was sort of my foot in the door. And back then, like, you needed to know somebody. Like, it didn't matter I went to an Ivy League school or anything like that. Like, it used to be very, very hard to get any sort of opportunities in the NFL. And it still is very hard, but at the very least, having that connection was important for me to sort of get my foot in the door and I guess get an opportunity to prove myself.
Got it. So, of course, I'm sure some of our listeners are wondering, what are you doing now, or what are you looking to do now?
So I actually was fortunate to get a consulting job with a college team, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. I'm doing a couple other consulting things, but I'm living on the beach in Florida right now, like across the street from the beach, and I, send these reports to different teams and organizations, and I'm enjoying that. I might do this long term. Like, it's a pretty good setup.
So you like doing the reports and the consulting work, but then being able to go to the beach and do what you want to do.
Yeah, again, I have a little bit of freedom is a nice deal. I mean, particularly the last 6 years, I lived a minute from the NovaCare Center in Philadelphia, and I worked somewhere around 100 to 120 hours a week, and it was sort of my life. And now I can sort of back up and relax a little bit and figure out what I want to do. And I still think there's probably a decent chance I might do something in the NFL next year, but I guess we'll see what happens. And I'm definitely enjoying things right now.
So, dude, you lived 100 to 120 hours a week for 6 years.
Yeah, I mean, people were like, kind of telling me that I had lost my mind a little bit, because I wouldn't even really take, the summer off when the team gets like a month off. I would work every day of that. And my perspective always was, there's, millions of fans that would, one, want this job, and two, are expecting this team to win. And I just always felt like this responsibility that, I was very grateful for my chance. I was relatively young. I had the energy to do it. And I'm like, I never wanted there to be any stone that wasn't unturned that could like help the team win. And, that was my mentality, and it was probably too much. And I got burnt out a little bit at different points, but for the chance to win the Super Bowl, it felt pretty fulfilling. At least it went towards something, I guess.
Dude, you have a Super Bowl ring.
Yeah, it was cool. Yeah.
That is awesome, man. And the thing is not only do you have a ring, like, you were a big part of it.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it was just sort of a crazy how it worked out. Like, so my first year out of college, I actually was, I was coaching this high school team, and we would probably be lucky to get 100 fans that were non-parents to show up to a game. Like, no one cared about our games. Like, we didn't even have stands. And then 3 seasons later, I'm, coaching in the Super Bowl, communicating information in the Super Bowl, and there's 103 million people watching. And like, just that transition was just like so crazy to me. It's still kind of hard to comprehend that actually happened. But I think hopefully it's like an inspiration for some of these people that are looking to get started, like, get your foot in the door somewhere. And, you never really know what can happen if you work hard and, you prove yourself.
Okay. So I want to get into how you got into the game manager role and how you would define that.
So, really for me, I always kept up on analytics, when I was in high school and college even. And there was a guy, Brian Burke from ESPN, like really the pioneer of football analytics. I keep up on all of his stuff. And, when I got to the Eagles, for Chip, I was sort of helping out in a role, with someone else that was, in charge of that position in terms of in-game stuff. But in terms of setting up, when to call timeouts, when to go for fourth downs, how do you handle 2-minute situations, 2-point conversions? I sort of got a lot of experience with that my first year. And then my second year, Doug, because he was sort of a new coach, he was looking for someone specifically to help him out with those in-game situations. And I just sort of happened to be there. And it worked out because, I just ended up developing a great relationship with him. And because he didn't have experience as a head coach in the NFL, he was so much more receptive than some of these older, experienced head coaches that have had some success. And they have a way of doing things, and that's how they're going to do things. Like, they don't care. I mean, you watch every weekend, some of these guys have been around the league for, 30 plus years, and they don't care to have some, 25, 26-year-old kid tell them what to do, or like give them a recommendation. They're like, I already know what I'm doing. And so I think Doug's willingness to, like, consider the data and also the ownership was very supportive of analytics and encouraging the coach. Like, look, if we go for fourth downs and it doesn't work, like, that's fine. Like, we believe in the data, and like, I think over time, like, this is going to help us. And like, I'm not going to kill you if, we go for a 4th and 2 and lose a game, because if it's supported, from the data, like, that's okay. And, over time it'll work out for us. So I think that combination was great. And I was very fortunate to end up in that role, but, really just trying to, help the coaches however I could, particularly with the in-game stuff. And then, game planning, like using more data or using certain, giving them certain ideas to maybe handle different situations differently or, game plan a little bit differently. I had a lot of fun with it. And it was definitely cool. But, there was a couple of times there where we went for fourth down, it didn't work. And then people on like the radio wanted to kill me. And that was kind of interesting.
And hold on a second. Did they know that? Like, I forget when was it known that you were like in this role for Doug?
So 2016, I did this role and no one had any idea. And then early 2017, there was like a very controversial fourth down that we went for and did not get against the Giants. I think it was either week 2 or 3. And, Doug mentioned something after the game about me helping him with these situations. And then after that week, I was like getting like people messaging me on Facebook and LinkedIn, like hoping that I died, like saying like you literally have no idea about anything. People are like, did you hear yourself on the radio? Like they're killing you on the radio. I'm like, all right, cool. But I was very fortunate that right after that, we won like 9 consecutive games and people sort of backed off. And obviously we ended up, winning the Super Bowl that season. So like people really, ended up enjoying what we were doing and like appreciating it a little bit more. But it was, for a moment there, it was not ideal.
So that 2017 year, I really feel like that's the first time I remember an NFL team being as aggressive on fourth down as you guys were. So the question is, what data did you have? What was it based on that you guys were as aggressive as you were?
I spent we were fairly aggressive the year before, but the reality was, one, we didn't convert some of these fourth downs, and 2, we were losing by a lot in a lot of games. So, we were going for fourth downs that teams probably would have went for anyways. But, that year we were leading games or, there were some critical situations where we converted and things like that in 2017 and it got more attention. But, I spent a lot of time with Coach Peterson after that first year because my first year with Doug, I was just sort of new and he was new. And like, I was sort of almost like a nobody. And the last thing I was going to do is like tell this NFL head coach, like, hey, you're messed up. Like we should try doing this, try doing that. But after a year, and particularly, we didn't really have a very good year. The first year we were 7-9, but he was very receptive to like, hey, are there any ways I can improve or like ways that we could use data to be better? And, I think the buy-in that second year was even higher. And, he realized like this could be a weapon for the team to really succeed and like really, translate into wins. And in particular, when I would try to communicate things to him to get him to buy in, like I know some analytics is definitely controversial and there'll be different results. But for me, I tried to, give him the most conservative scenario, be like, assume we are terrible on offense, assume we're terrible at 2-point conversions, assume they're great on defense, great at stopping 2-point conversions. This information is still saying to go for it because a lot of times these head coaches are like, well, it doesn't factor in team strength or what if my center's hurt or they have a great defensive tackle. And, the situations I was trying to communicate is like, look, in many of these instances, even if we're bad and they're very good, the data still would support going for it, especially like the 4th and 1 and 4th and 2 type situations. And I think that giving him that sort of confidence that, like the data was so clearly in his favor that I think he was, really receptive to it. And then we had a streak that we converted a bunch of fourth downs in a row. And I think that really emboldened him to just keep rolling with it. So that it was sort of a little bit luck too, that, because I definitely think some head coaches are a little bit anchored to their previous, decisions. Maybe they went for the last 3 fourth downs and they failed on all 3. And next thing they want to punt a lot or kick more field goals. But we just kept converting him and it kind of was like a domino effect where he just kept rolling with it.
That is awesome. So you keep talking about the data. What data do you use for these decisions, whether to go for it or not, when to call timeout, et cetera?
So, really, I guess you try to work off of historical data, whatever sample you feel like could be like representative. So maybe if you're looking at, field goal rates, it's actually interesting because field goals have improved pretty drastically over time. So, maybe you look at the last 5 years of field goal rates and you do a regression of, okay, of all kicks from, the 20-yard line, what's the frequency of these guys going in as opposed to, kicks from the 40-yard line or the 30-yard line and sort of building a sample. And then maybe on fourth downs, you don't have as many fourth downs. So maybe you're working off of 10 years of data and, taking out garbage time, taking out, 2-minute situations, trying to just create a sample of, historical data that is as useful and, meaningful as possible. Because I think sometimes you can get some misleading stuff like, okay, a team's up 17 at the end of the game and they're playing, cover 2 or, off cover 4 and just sort of giving up 4th and 2s. Like that's not useful for predicting how you're going to convert in the future. So I think we would always sort of fine tune that and look for, better samples to use. And it's actually sort of helpful now that more teams are going for 4th downs because you have like more data to work off that you could really, get a good feel for like, all right, what can we expect our conversion rate to be on, 4th and 2? Maybe in the past you only had 60 plays to work off. Now you have, 220, and you can get off that larger sample. You can get a little bit more confidence on like at least what an average situation is. And in general, like most of the stuff that I would communicate would typically be average situations. And then I would sort of like give the head coach the freedom to sort of assess based off his instinct on how our team relates to average, how their team relates to average, to sort of tilt some of the close decisions, how he felt was appropriate. And I think that was sort of a good model.
So I'm assuming where you were up in the box,
Yeah.
and it'd be 4th and 2, and you'd say, go or don't go, or it'd be 4th down, you'd say timeout. Like take me through the mechanics of you, because it wasn't just 4th down decisions and field goal decisions and punt. It was also timeouts, right?
Yeah. So one thing I'd say is if you're communicating on 4th down, like you've already screwed up. That information needs to be communicated earlier, really probably 2nd or 3rd down, particularly because, with that play clock thing so quick, the previous play ends 40 seconds until you want your head coach to really decide almost immediately whether or not they're going to go for 4th down. And in many cases, you want them to know, on 3rd down, what the necessary yards would be to go for on 4th down. So, it might be, we break the huddle on 2nd down. And I might mention to Coach Peterson, like, hey, if we get to 4th and, 3 or less here, this would be a go for it situation. And then after 2nd down, we get to 3rd and 5. And then all of a sudden he's willing to run the ball on 3rd and 5, knowing that he might have 2 downs or, a 2-yard gain might be good enough to go for a 4th down, as opposed to, just typically calling a drop back pass, which is what 98% of teams would do there. But even with timeouts, like the timeout stuff will get super complicated because, you're talking about like, all right, if we get tackled inbounds, we might want to call timeout here. If we get sacked, we don't want to call timeout. If we gain 3 yards, we might want to get on the ball and no huddle, but we don't want to go super fast. But if we gain 7 yards, we do want to go fast. Like there was a lot of things going on, and I was trying to, communicate as clearly as possible so that something unexpected didn't happen, if that makes sense. Because the worst thing really, in my opinion, is when you're wasting timeouts because you're just like not very efficient in your process. And then, trying to factor in different things like, okay, offensive coaches obviously want to score in 2 minutes, but at the same time, in a perfect world, you're scoring with, very little time left on the clock. So like trying to find a balance between, huddling and taking your time in a 2-minute situation, as opposed to just going for the touchdown as quickly as possible. Or at the end of the game, if there's 2 minutes and 56 seconds left after their 1st down and you're in 4-minute defense, like do you call timeout there? Do you let the clock run down 39 seconds? Just you trying to use data there to assist the coach as much as possible. But same thing with like 2-point conversion situations. Like at some point on the drive or prior to a drive, I might mention like, okay, it's a TV timeout. If we do manage to score here, the data would support leaning towards going for 2. It's not the end of the world if we don't. And then there might be other situations where it might be like, okay, if we do get a touchdown, the data very, very strongly supports going for 2, and just sort of giving them a heads up so they're not, I guess, wasting time deciding. And maybe you can have an offensive coordinator or a quarterback coach in the back of their mind starting like looking through a 2-point menu on that drive to sort of prepare for the situation. But I think the big thing for us is we were always trying to be very ahead of the game and not making decisions on the fly last second, because the worst thing you can do is, make the decision on 4th down. All of a sudden you're going to get a delay a game. You're wasting a timeout deciding. And I think that process is really inefficient. And you see that every single week where teams are continuing to do that because they're just not as thoroughly prepared, in my opinion.
Yeah. 2 more quick ones, Ryan. This is phenomenal. This is exactly what I was looking for. So where would you say, I guess I'll ask the other one first. Why are certain teams so bad at it? I mean, I'm just here watching on TV or I'm at the game, and I even wrote a story for DK Nation a couple of weeks ago about this. I tagged you in it. I'm just amazed how often teams make what I think are really, really egregious errors. Like even that Seattle Rams Thursday nighter where it was like the Rams ran a play when they shouldn't have, and then the Seahawks didn't call timeout when I felt like they should have. It almost makes me question myself because I'm like, do they have some data? Like, am I missing? Because I'm not the smartest guy in the world, right? Like, but it's hard to believe what I think are clear mistakes sometimes. Why do you think some of these teams are so bad at it?
I think, in my opinion, it really comes down to many of these guys have been in the league for so long and have had success. Overall, their career records might be greater. Maybe they've had a great quarterback their whole career. And because of that, they paying attention to these small details, like they simply don't have a process in place, or they don't have somebody specifically helping them, or and these head coaches or coordinators, they, in their mind, they have a way that they believe is winning football. And that's how you operate. And they don't really care what the data says. And they might not even have anybody specifically helping them in game or, on a weekly basis. And it's a weird situation for, say an ownership or a front office where like you might have a coach that his career record is, he wins 65% of his games. So he's considered a pretty good head coach, but, because of that, you're not in a position to make changes there, but they consistently are making mistakes with the game management stuff, but they also have the leverage to not change, if that makes sense. Where like, I think you're going to see more and more head coaches get hired in the future where there's somewhat of a requirement that they have some kind of analytical person or game management person, because you're completely correct. Some of the decisions, I think Twitter gets a little bit ahead of themselves saying that a coach was 100,000,000% wrong, but there are some that, I think, you might look at 8 different models and all 8 would very clearly say that the decision that was made would be a mistake. And I think those cases, these guys definitely need help. And until something changes, like their team starts losing, or some team, for example, like the Eagles win a lot of games using analytics. That was something that I think motivated more teams to do this is, seeing a team win the Super Bowl, going for 4th downs, going for 2-point conversions. And because the NFL is such a copycat league, they just go back and see what the previous Super Bowl winner did. And everyone tries to like take some things from that. Just like even last year, a lot of teams saw what Brandon Staley was doing with the Rams. And now all of a sudden you see all these teams trying to run too high stuff on 1st and 2nd downs and almost copycat that to like varying levels of success. But I think that's such a trend in the league where teams look at what was the most successful the previous year and they all want to start doing it. And it's like they need to see somebody succeed with it before they actually will do it.
Yeah. Last one, I guess, Ryan, would just be what do you see as the biggest area for potential improvement, whether it's 4th down, 2-point conversions, timeout management, or something we didn't even talk about?
I think just, using data for actual game planning and like evaluating different schemes. I think we're getting to the point, some of the really interesting stuff with next gen stats and, GPS tracking where they can almost, I think ESPN has a model that basically can identify coverages immediately upon the snap. Like that's pretty exceptional. And then maybe you can start to look at like, okay, what's the best thing against Tampa 2? What are the best concepts out of this formation, against an under front or an over front or against the bear front? I think we're getting to that point where you can, have a little bit more in-depth analysis than rather than just say, okay, run or run pass or call more play actions, but actually, discussing some actual concepts that could be done. One thing that I think is super interesting that's going on right now, though, is that particularly with all these teams playing too high defenses, I think you're seeing the number of possessions in the game is and the 4th down aggressiveness. The number of possessions in the game is decreasing because offenses are getting better. They're staying on the field more. There's a lot more like dinking and dunking with short passes. And what it's doing is it's making it so that these underdogs, I think, are having a better chance of staying in the game because you're seeing these long, methodical 12, 13, 15 play drives because the other team is just sitting there and too high. And what's happening is like you get to halftime and both teams have only had the ball, 2 or 3 times. And I think that the frequency that that's occurring is happening so much. And now you're seeing more and more upsets, or you're seeing away teams, maybe relatively equal in terms of win percentages compared to the home team, just because the number of possessions are down. And when the possessions are lower, you see more like fluky things, like one little play here and there, an interception, a tipped pass could, change the outcome of a game. And so if more games are having, 8, 9 possessions, as opposed to in the past, they were, 13, 14, 15 possessions, you're going to see more upsets and you're going to see more games where, teams like Mahomes might just not get on the field enough to, make plays. But it's sort of an interesting deal how that's sort of working out at this time. And I think to some degree, you're going to see more teams, I think, getting away from the too high stuff and moving back towards, being aggressive and challenging and trying to make something happen on defense.
Check him out on Twitter at Paganetti Ryan. Ryan, this is fantastic. Thank you so much, man. I'm so glad we got to connect. Exactly what I was looking for. And good luck next Friday night when my Tigers come to town, man. You're going to need it.
Peace. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. There he is, Ryan Paganetti. That was awesome, man. So awesome. Almost as awesome as your car being ready to rock and roll once the bad weather happens. That's why Autozone has Visibility Week from November 1st to November 7th. Wipers squeaking or streaking? Yeah, it's no good. $10 bonus reward when you buy 2 Rain-X Quantum wiper blades. Why don't you just get in the Autozone rewards program? They'll give you $5 just to do that. Then you can get the Sylvania LED Fog Twin Pack with a $25 bonus reward. So long daylight savings time. AutoZone Visibility Week is right around the corner. Ready to see more and drive safer? Visit your nearest AutoZone or head to AutoZone.com to start your job today. Get in the zone, AutoZone.
Tux Takes.
Morning, Ross. Let's start with some COVID news, unfortunately. Packers wide receiver Alan Lazard joined Joe Barry and Devontae Adams on the COVID-19 list, and Bears head coach Matt Nagy announced that he has also tested positive.
Right. Well, we'll talk more about what it means for the Packers tomorrow with Greg Cosell. They've got that Thursday night game. No D coordinator, no 2 of their top 3 or 4 receivers. That's rough. And if Nagy tested positive, unlikely he'll be able to coach the Bears on Sunday against the Niners.
Tux Takes.
Onto the injury front, looks like Jags wide receiver DJ Chark and Saints guard Andres Pete both done for the year.
Yeah, I mean, the older I get, the more injuries bother me. It's part of the game, but I'm 42 now, and I realize that these injuries stay with you. When you're like in high school and college, you don't look at it that way. It's like, oh, okay, I broke my arm. It'll heal in 6 weeks. Well, the reality is some of these injuries stay with you. And by the way, those are both big losses for those teams as well.
Tux Takes.
Broncos made a couple of trades over the last couple of days, acquiring defensive end Stephen Weatherly from the Vikings and linebacker Kenny Young from the Rams.
Right. These are like draft pick swaps for the 2023 draft, late round picks. It is interesting, though, that the Broncos are clearly trying to upgrade their roster for the rest of the season. I mean, they are not relenting. They are not yielding. They're not saying, hey, this isn't our year. They still believe they can be in the mix. Otherwise, I don't think they'd make these moves.
Tux Takes.
And finally, Texans owner Cal McNair apologized for a racially insensitive remark at an event back in May. And Pittsburgh Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin has shot down any talk of leaving for USC.
I don't even know what to say about the McNair thing other than, just because your father was successful or an owner of a team or whatever, it doesn't always mean that, the children are like that too, right? So I guess that's the only point. I've never met Cal McNair. I don't know the guy, but I do think there are times where the apple does fall far from the tree. I don't know if that's the case with Cal McNair, but I've seen a lot of family businesses. Look, I know a lot of successful people, and their kids are not cut from the same cloth, I'd say. As for Mike Tomlin, that guy's hilarious, always. I mean, never say never, but never. Thought that was awesome. Look, Carson Palmer said that USC would love to have him. Of course they would love to have him. I love overcoming the odds. I love rewriting the playbook. I love delivering under pressure. I love the MVPs of small business that lead their teams to victory all year long. Visa is proud to provide playmakers everywhere with more tools to help grow their business and help them achieve even greater success. Because the more people we can empower, the more we all win. Visa, it's a network working for everyone. Speaking of small businesses, what an awesome transition, Bri. We go right from there to Pizza Boy Brewing, Sporticulture, Vision Comics with an X, HumanHeadNYC.com, SteakhouseSports.com. Even Money, College Draft, both already posted. Fantasy Feast Episode 1 will be a little bit later today. I think we're done here.
Thanks for listening to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Fantasy Feast, Even Money, Business of Sports, and College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, RossTucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.
A lot of times on the show, I mentioned DraftKings. Here's what you need to know. You got to be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER, or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. By the way, if what I was talking about included a deposit bonus, doesn't always, sometimes it does. Deposit bonus requires 25 times playthrough, and deposit bonuses are paid out in site credit.